Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Chinese economy, and specifically to talk about electric vehicles. Now, can I ask you a question? Are you driving an electric vehicle yet? Have you thought about buying one? Well, you may not be. However, over the next 10 years, I think all of us will be moving in that direction. A lot of governments have introduced legislation already that bans the production of combustion engine vehicles. So over the next 10 or 20 years, we may well see a complete change in the market and all of us may be driving electric cars. And China have seen this as a fantastic opportunity to break into a market that historically they haven't really been a major player in. If you think about all of the cars that you've owned, I would bet that not many of them have been made in China. However, that may well be changing. And if you look at where China sits today, it's the biggest manufacturer of electric vehicles and also electric batteries that are used in those vehicles. And as well as producing its own brands such as BYD and Geely, China is also making cars for other overseas manufacturers. So a large percentage of the Tesla vehicles that are sold globally are actually made in factories in China. So this is a fantastic opportunity from the Chinese authorities' point of view. However, they've now hit a stumbling block because the USA, Canada, and now the European Union have accused China of subsidising their electric vehicle manufacturers. So basically allowing them to produce these vehicles at very low cost and then selling them way below market price all around the world. And in order to combat that, the USA and Canada recently introduced a 100% tariff on all Chinese electric vehicles that are imported. So basically that doubles the price of all of those cars in the USA and Canada. And the European Union, which is actually the biggest single market for Chinese EV exports, has now introduced a sliding scale of tariffs in the same manner as the USA and Canada. BYD, which recently overtook Tesla as the world's largest seller of electric vehicles, will face an additional tariff of 17% on top of the general import duty of 10% applied against imports into the EU. Geely, which is the second largest Chinese manufacturer, will face an additional tariff of 18.8%. The state-owned entity SAIC will face additional tariffs of 35.3%. The Tesla vehicles that are manufactured in China will face an additional tariff of 7.8%. All of the other Chinese manufacturers that cooperated with the EU investigation will face an additional tariff of 20.7%, and those that didn't participate in the investigation will face a tariff of 35.3%. The holiday season is here, and it's always difficult to find a present that's unique for friends and family. But thanks to today's sponsor, Fume, I've got something that could fit the bill, that encourages people to create good habits whilst being fun and relaxing. And it comes in this amazingly cool packaging. And if I just open it up here, you can see that this is a really fun product to unbox. It's so cool and it feels so good. It's got a great weight to it. Fume is a flavoured air device that's perfect for anyone who's looking to break away from bad habits or just wants something enjoyable to use. It's nicotine-free, non-toxic and completely guilt-free. No batteries, no vapour and nothing to charge. It's easy to use, safe anywhere and it looks amazing. Fume has a sleek, high-quality design that anyone will love unboxing. And what really makes Fume special is that it's got customisable flavours such as crisp mint, maple pepper and white cranberry, and the device is made to be fidgeted with, so it helps to calm anxiety. This holiday season, you can give the gift of better habits. Head to tryfume.com/JoeBlogs or scan the QR code on the screen now and use the code JoeBlogs to get a free topper when you order a journey pack for a special holiday season. Now, in terms of the global market for electric vehicles, in the third quarter of 2024, the USA actually overtook Europe as being the second largest market. It sold 344,000 vehicles in the quarter. And as you can see from this table, in the 9 months to the end of September, over 1.2 million electric vehicles were sold in the USA, which is still considerably less than the 7 million electric vehicles sold in China. However, the USA is by far the second largest market in the whole of the world. The third largest market for electric vehicles is Germany, which has sold over 413,000 in the first 9 months of 2024. The fourth largest is the UK, which has sold just under 330,000 vehicles, followed by France with total sales of around 317,000, the Netherlands with around 121,000, Norway comes in at number 7, followed by Belgium, Sweden and Denmark. And just in case you're wondering in terms of the percentage of the US market, it's sitting at around 8.9%, so less than 10% of all of new vehicle sales in the USA are electric cars. But because the market is so large, that 9% still makes it the second largest market in the world. And I think this table is really interesting because it shows which countries have been the largest adopters of electric vehicles so far. And you can see that in the first 9 months of 2024, over 85% of all vehicles sold in Norway were electric vehicles. And when you look at the numbers for the month of September, it was actually more than 96%. So Norway is very close to being fully electric already. The second highest adopter is Denmark, where 47% of all vehicles sold in the first 9 months of 2024 were electric. And in September, that percentage was above 57%, followed by Iceland, Sweden and Finland. So what you can see here is that Scandinavia as a whole is a big adopter of the electric vehicle concept. The Netherlands comes in at number 6 on this list, followed by Belgium, Luxembourg. China is in at number 9, where over 28% of all vehicles sold in the first 9 months of 2024 were electric, and Portugal is number 10. In terms of the financial implications of the new tariffs that have been introduced by the European Union, these are going to have a seriously detrimental impact for China. This chart shows the destination of Chinese electric vehicle exports from January 2019 through to April 2024, which is the latest data that we have available broken down by country. And what this chart shows is that over the past 5.5 years, there has been an enormous increase in the export of Chinese electric vehicles, an increase of more than 160 times over that period, which is obviously reflective of the fact that the market itself has grown rapidly and China has been taking a bigger percentage share of that growing market. And if we look at the breakdown of where those sales are going, you can see that the single largest market that China has been exporting to is the European Union, which accounts for more than 30% of all Chinese electric vehicle exports. The second largest market was previously the United Kingdom. However, that's recently been overtaken by Brazil. The fourth largest export market is Australia, followed by Thailand, and then we have a whole host of other countries which make up a very small percentage of China's exports. And you can see that the USA, despite the fact that it's the second largest market for electric vehicles, doesn't really register in terms of electric vehicle exports for China. And there are 3 reasons for that. Firstly, the USA has been a relatively late adopter in terms of electric vehicle sales. Secondly, there hasn't been a lot of demand for Chinese electric vehicles. And thirdly, the tariffs that were introduced recently, the 100% tariff, have meant that those Chinese vehicles are now considerably more expensive than they were historically. The other interesting thing to note about this chart is that the UK, Australia and Brazil have not introduced any additional tariffs for Chinese electric vehicles, so they're happy to take those vehicles at the bargain price that Chinese manufacturers are selling them at without the tariffs. But I think the single biggest takeaway from this chart is that China is currently exporting over 30% of all of its electric vehicles into the European Union, and those vehicles are going to be considerably more expensive following the introduction of the tariffs, which came into effect on the 30th of October 2024. And that's going to dent the sale of those cars because when you're buying an electric vehicle, you want to get a good deal. And as the Chinese vehicles will now be more expensive, they will sell less of them. So the introduction of these latest tariffs is obviously bad news from China's point of view. And China isn't sitting back and just taking this lightly. They have now decided that they want to investigate a variety of imports into China that are coming from the European Union. This chart shows China's top imports by value from Germany, France and Italy. And as you can see, the biggest single item that China is importing are cars from Germany. And interestingly, Germany actually voted against the introduction of the additional tariffs for Chinese electric vehicles. And the reason that they did that is because German car manufacturers are very worried that China will now introduce a reciprocal tariff against the import of European cars. And if they do so, then manufacturers such as BMW, Mercedes and Audi, which are all German, will suffer and could lose sales and profitability. Now, interestingly, the Chinese authorities haven't said that they're going to investigate the automotive sector yet. However, they have said that they're investigating the dumping of excess production of pork, dairy products and brandy by the European Union into the Chinese markets. And this chart shows a breakdown of the countries that export the largest amounts of pork products, dairy products and brandy products into the Chinese market. And as you can see, the biggest single exporter of pork products is Spain, exporting over $1.5 billion worth per year, followed by the Netherlands at $620 million, Denmark at $608 million, France at $336 million, and Ireland at $123 million. In terms of the export of dairy products, France is the largest single exporter, mainly cheese products, exporting over $211 million worth per year. The second largest exporter of dairy is Denmark, exporting over $55 million per year, followed by the Netherlands, Spain, and Ireland. And in terms of brandy, the biggest single exporter by a country mile here is France, which is exporting over $1.7 billion worth of brandy products into China. And you can see that that's actually the single biggest item showing for any of these three categories for any of the countries. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that the European countries have denied that they're dumping their excess product, that they're trying to just sell all of this at a low price in China to recoup some value. But China is investigating and they will decide whether or not they're going to introduce additional tariffs on all of these items. And if they do, then obviously the biggest losers would be France and Spain. But it will be interesting to see whether or not the Chinese authorities decide to investigate what's going on with the automotive imports, because if they did introduce additional tariffs to offset the tariffs against Chinese vehicles, then that would seriously impact on the German car manufacturers. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's going on in the electric vehicle market is really quite interesting. It's been a huge growth market over the past few years, predominantly as people switch away from combustion engines to adopting the electric concept. Now, for a lot of individuals, we're still not there yet. I don't have an electric vehicle yet. I'm still worried about range. I've got range anxiety. If I get behind a car and I'm having to drive 200 miles and it's only got 300 miles on the range clock, and I start to use the indicators and the windscreen wipers and the heater and the aircon and the lights and the music and anything else in the car, and it starts to go down, I'm going to sit there very stressed. So until we get to the point where we've got a range of 1,000 miles, I'm unlikely to buy an electric vehicle. That's just my personal point of view at this point in time. But a lot of people are adopting electric vehicles. And as I mentioned earlier in today's video, it's now almost 1 in 4 when you add in plug-in hybrid vehicles. So we're getting there. And I'm sure over the next 5 to 10 years, ranges will improve and we'll get more charging stations as well, because I think the infrastructure is one of the other things that everybody's concerned about. At the moment, there potentially are enough charging points because there's not that many electric vehicles. But if we get to the point where everybody has an electric vehicle, how are you going to charge it? Because not everybody has their own house. They don't have their own driveway to plug it into their own charging point. They will need to charge it on the streets. And we certainly don't have enough to be able to charge every single car sitting on every single road all around the world. And that's going to represent a major challenge, I think. But that's probably for another video rather than this one. But in today's video, we saw that China has dived headfirst into this market. It's seen the opportunity for the move to electric vehicles as being the chance to become a major player in the automotive sector, because it wasn't a big player historically, but because it's been developing the battery technology for companies like Tesla, it decided to grow its own industry. And BYD is now the biggest single producer of electric vehicles around the world. It's taking on Tesla head to head. Now, over the past few years, Chinese vehicles have become very cheap. They've been able to undercut companies like Tesla. And the governments in the USA, Canada, and the European Union have accused China of actually subsidizing those electric vehicle manufacturers, basically giving them grants or waiving taxes and other charges to allow them to be able to produce lots of these vehicles at a very low price and then export them. And in fact, the production capability of the electric vehicle manufacturers in China over the next 12 months is estimated to be 3 million vehicles, which is actually double the size of the whole of the European Union market. And the European Union was very concerned, as China's biggest export market, that it would be flooded with very low-cost vehicles, which would basically put all of the European manufacturers out of business. Because if you can buy a Chinese vehicle for 50% less than one that's produced in Europe, that's going to be very attractive to a lot of people, particularly as the government legislation kicks in that's forcing people to buy electric as a new vehicle rather than a combustion engine. So the European Union decided that it didn't want that to happen, and it's now introduced a whole host of different tariffs depending on what the brands are. And this differs to what happened in the USA and Canada, where we saw a 100% tariff introduced across the board. Doesn't matter what the brand is, if it's Chinese produced, it's going to have a 100% tariff applied against it. So China is now facing the very real prospect of seeing the sales for all of its electric vehicles falling dramatically, because the price of those cars is going to go up significantly. And so the European manufacturers and the US manufacturers can now start competing on a like-for-like basis. So you might think this is good news for the European and US manufacturers. However, the problem that we've got is that this is creating a trade war. When you introduce specific tariffs targeted against Chinese companies, the likely outcome of that is that China is going to respond, and it's going to start introducing tariffs against US, Canadian and European manufacturers. And we're waiting to see what the response is going to be. As we saw earlier in the video, China have already accused Europe of dumping pork, dairy and brandy into its market at low costs. They're saying that that's just excess capacity that's being sold cheaply to undercut the local manufacturers. I'm waiting to see what the outcome of that investigation is, but it's likely that China will introduce higher tariffs against all of those imports, which will damage the sale of those imports, and therefore those countries will lose revenue. But it will be interesting to see whether or not China decides to do an investigation into the automotive sector, or maybe other sectors for companies coming out of USA, Canada and Europe as a tit-for-tat trade-off. But the overall summary of today's video is that China currently is the world's largest exporter of electric vehicles. It's been a good market for China. However, it's now been hit with a whole raft of tariffs, which are going to increase the cost of those cars. That's going to reduce the sales of those cars. Therefore, those Chinese car manufacturers are going to see their sales and profitability falling. And this comes at a time when the Chinese economy is already on its knees. Those companies are struggling because they're selling as many as they can in the domestic market, but domestic demand is weak because of the weak Chinese economy. They need the export markets to be able to keep up the volume of vehicles that they're producing, and these tariffs are going to seriously damage those volumes. Therefore, the companies will see less profit, and it could cause problems in all of those different businesses. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face. This holiday season, you can give the gift of better habits. Head to tryfume.com/JoeBlogs or scan the QR code on the screen now and use the code JoeBlogs to get a free topper when you order a journey pack for a special holiday season.